We continue on to slide 34, which is the projection pathway for hearing. Cochlear nerve from the spiral ganglion becomes part of cranial nerve 8, the vestibulocochlear nerve, and then on to the cochlear nucleus of pons, the superior alveolar nucleus, where efferent information leaves the middle ear muscles. This is where this reflex for loud noises comes from. And then to the inferior colliculus of the midbrain for auditory reflexes. Remember that's where auditory reflexes are, in the inferior colliculus. And further along on slide 35, projection pathway to medial geniculate nucleus of thalamus. So like all the senses except for olfaction goes through the thalamus to the primary auditory cortex and temporal lobe. And we're going to look at that projection pathway again in the next slide. But first, let's start with equilibrium. Let's call it static and dynamic equilibrium. Static equilibrium is just really remaining upright and not falling over. And dynamic equilibrium is movement of your head. And in the vestibule, there's two parts called the sacral and the utricle. The static equilibrium, and there's something called the macula, and there's hair cells and supporting cells, very similar to the hair cells in the cochlea that are receptors for audition. And there's a kinocilium and an otolithic membrane, and the otolithic membrane with otoliths. These otoliths, it's sort of like a heavy jello, and it's got little concretions of calcium carbonate in there. These are called otoliths. And so this heavy jello moves when you move your body, and it bends hair cells, and it tells you that you're leaning in one direction or the other. Slide 36 is showing you the auditory projection pathway from all the way from the cochlea out here. Now this is interesting. This is something really different too. Look how many neurons are involved in this. The first one along the vestibulocochlear nerve, and there are two, and then there's the second order neuron. One goes to the superior alveolar nucleus. One goes to inferior colliculus, and then there's a third one here that goes from the inferior colliculus to the thalamus, and then there's a fourth one that goes to the primary auditory cortex. This is different from all other sensory pathways. Remember, we talked about the other ones earlier that all have three neurons, first order, second order, and third order. This has a fourth order, so it's different than all other pathways. Okay, here is equilibrium in the utricle and the sacral of the vestibule. You have these hair cells, and you have this gelatinous layer, this otolithic membrane. It has otoliths in there, and when you move your body, the heavy jello moves to one side, moves the cilia, and distorts the membrane again, and leads to receptive potential and action potentials in the vestibular branch of cranial nerve 8. And remember, this is static equilibrium. Okay, slide 38. This is dynamic equilibrium. And these are the semicircular canals. And there's a reason there's three of them, because we live in a three-dimensional world. And so this is movement of your head, up, down, over, whatever movement of your head. And this is a very similar situation. This crista ampullaris covered by the cupula, hair cells with a kinocilium. It's got the jello on top of the kinocilium is in jello, and when you move your head, the endolymph inside moves the jello, and that distorts the membrane. And it's essentially the same thing. And then the projection pathways, vestibular nerve is part of cranial nerve 8, vestibular nuclei and pons and medulla oblongata. And this equilibrium information sent to 5 places: the cerebellum, eye muscles, reticular formation, spinal cord, and thalamus. This is a dynamic equilibrium receptor inside the the semicircular canals, and there's the crista ampullus. This is the cupula. This is the firm jello. Slide 40 shows what happens when your head is still. The endolymph is still, and it doesn't make the cupula move. When you move your head, the fluid moves, which which moves the cupula, which bends the stereocilia, which causes receptor potential and nerve signals to the brain. Slide 41 just shows you where all the different places that equilibrium information has to go. Has to go to the cerebellum to let you know where your body parts are in space. It's like proprioception. It has to go to vestibular nuclei in the medulla oblongata. It has to go to oculomotor control, to control your eye muscles. It has to go to muscle tone and balance and the conscious awareness of your balance. So like I said, 5 different places.